Hey everybody, this is Rykard here again. Today I just want to do a quick video going over the new Tutor moves released with the Isle of Armor expansion in Pokemon Sword and Shield. Now this is just going to hopefully serve as like a starting point for some discussions on these moves because they actually are very interesting and have a lot of really unique effects that benefit a lot of different Pokemon in many ways. As you would expect from, a Tutor expansion of sorts. I'm just glad that they didn't make us buy a whole nother game to get Tutors. That's the same game again. Anyway, so we're going to go into this right now. I was just looking at these kind of like theorizing beforehand, but the first move that we're going to talk about is Expanding Force, which is a psychic type move, 80 base power, that increases in power on psychic terrain and also will damage all opposing Pokemon on psychic terrain as well. So in doubles, this is actually a really cool move because it could be used to damage both opponents, but in singles, it'll also just be boosted in power. I believe it's a 50% boost, so it'll turn into a 120 base power move with the psychic terrain up. Now, obviously, there's going to be a ton of psychic types that learn this, some interesting ones as well, like Wigglytuff learning it is kind of fun. But for the most part, the real main Pokemon that you're going to be using this with is going to be, that's funny that Darmanitan learns, I guess because it's Zen mode. The main Pokemon that's going to be using this is going to be Indeedee, because it's the only Pokemon of the ones that are currently out that have access to setting up its own psychic terrain. So this basically allows Indeedee to forego running psychic and instead can run this move instead, and will basically just increase its damage output significantly. So that's a really cool thing specifically with this Pokemon. Again, the other Pokemon benefit from this move too, but you really don't see a ton of things setting up psychic terrain manually. So it's a little bit interesting to see how it will be used aside from just using it with Indeedee. But that's kind of a cool little unique thing with this Pokemon that I think makes it even better now, due to the fact that it now has an even more powerful move to have access to, which is great. Moving on though, we have a new Steel type move called Steel Roller. It's a 130 base power physical attack, very minimal usage because only 5 PP, which will be boosted to 8 with PP ups. But it attacks while destroying terrain. So if you have terrain up on the battlefield, it will destroy the terrain, but it won't work unless terrain is actually there. Now I looked through this list of Pokemon that learn it. Unfortunately, there are no Pokemon that learn it that also through an ability set up terrain, which is kind of annoying. But you could use it as kind of like a move to basically cripple an opponent's team that's trying to set up terrain. Again, I think this is more useful in doubles, more consistently at least. Or you can somehow find a way to use it with your own team if you are running terrain on your team. And that actually could be a little bit more of a consistent application, because if you're running something like Rillaboom or Indeedee or Pincurchin, or the other terrain I can't think of right now, Misty Terrain, I guess Galar Weezing can do that. You can actually reliably use this move if you switch into it while terrain is up. So it can be actually pretty interesting. The main reason I think Rillaboom is probably the best is because of U-turn. So you can U-turn, set up your grassy terrain, and then switch out into a Pokemon that has access to it. And there's a lot of Pokemon that are not Steel types that learn it, which give them a really interesting, powerful Steel type coverage move that you would not expect. But some of the most interesting users of it, I think, are Ferrothorn and also Dhelmise, because both of them make use of both situations. If you have the grassy terrain up, obviously it'll be boosting your grass type moves. I think it still does that. And if you have the new move, you're going to be using a really powerful steel that's stab for Dhelmise because of Steel Worker, and Ferrothorn to make use of both situations. So it's really interesting. I think those are really the only two Pokemon that I can see being most useful using it, with Rillaboom obviously if you're using grassy terrain, but you could find some other uses for it. It's just a little bit inconsistent, but you could definitely team build around trying to make use of that. The only downside is that you will have to then set the terrain up again to use it again. So it's kind of like a interesting niche option. Next move that we're going to talk about though is Scale Shot. This is the new dragon type, basically like Bullet Seed or Tail Slap or Rock Blast, whatever you want to call it, Icicle Spear. It's 2 to 5 times in a row, just like all the others, and it also boosts your speed stat while lowering your defense stat. So that's really interesting because there's a few Pokemon that could benefit from the speed boost of using that. And that could also be used in combination with, Dragon Dance or Swords Dance or something like that as well, if you want to free up another move slot. And I'll talk about a couple of Pokemon that benefits a lot in a second. But mainly, the first one that I'm going to mention is going to be, where is he? So Crocodile is one of the Pokemon that gets it. And this is great because Crocodile has Moxie, and this gives you a reliable way to boost your speed without having to run a Choice Scarf. So that's a huge thing for it. For Haxorus as well, this can allow you to run a Swords Dance set without having to run Dragon Dance, so you get the added boost while also having a move that boosts your speed stat. And that's really, really interesting for this Pokemon as well. Draudigon will now have a reliable way to boost its speed with Sheer Force. Obviously, it's super powerful, so using this Pokemon now with a way to boost its speed is really, really good. And there's a couple other like situations, like Wishy-Washy getting it is really funny. That really, some Pokemon definitely could benefit from it more so than others. Sandaconda getting it is also really interesting because it doesn't really have a way of boosting its speed right now. So you can even run that on like a coil set or something like that and have like multiple boosts going on. And some other Pokemon, obviously, that are really fast already, like Inteleon, Barraskewda, all those Pokemon can benefit, obviously, from just then not being able to be swept. Like, using it with, like, Salazzle on, like, a Nasty Plot set, like, potentially, it's not going to be a great attacking move, but, if your opponent is weakened, you could, find ways to make use of it, definitely, in a lot of different situations. So it's kind of a cool move. Meteor Beam is also a really interesting new one. It's a Rock-type move. And it's basically like Rock-type Solar Beam is the best way to think about it. It also boosts your special attack while you use it. I don't know if this wouldn't like work differently in Sand, because that would be cool if it didn't have a charge turn in Sand. But anyway, as with all special attacking rock moves, really the only Pokemon that can really make use of them is Lunatone. And so you could possibly use it with Power Herb with like a Rock Polish set, which is interesting. So you'd boost your speed and then boost your special attack while having a really powerful rock move. That's really the main Pokemon that's going to benefit from this. I mean, some of the other Pokemon that get it as well is really interesting. Like, of course, Necrozma gets it because Necrozma gets every move. But, I mean, it doesn't have like a crazy wide distribution. I mean, Colossal might be able to use it. But yeah, like I said, it doesn't have a crazy wide distribution. There really aren't a lot of specially offensive rock types. Colossal maybe could use this on a Trick Room set, which could be interesting. So that might have some application, but really there's not a ton of other Pokemon that aren't like the pseudo or like the legendary things like Jirachi or Mew or something like that could really make useful use of this. Maybe Starmie, I don't know. But it's really not a crazy interesting move unless you absolutely have to have a rock type coverage move. Next move to talk about is Misty Explosion. This is basically an explosion move that's fairy type and special, so that makes it really unique. It also is increased in power in Misty Terrain. I'm assuming it's the same thing where it's like a 50% increase, so it'll be a 150 base power move. There's really only one Pokemon, again, that can just like set this off, and that's Weezing because of it getting the Misty Surge ability as hidden ability. This is also really interesting too for Weezing specifically because you can use it to basically like set up a hazard or something like that, explode, and then have another teammate make use of the Misty Terrain. Misty Terrain is really interesting because it doesn't really benefit anyone except for the fact that you can't get statused, which is kind of cool. But it's a kind of interesting option. I could even see like some other Pokemon running this because most of these Pokemon are special attackers like Alchemy, Primarina, Hatterene, etc. So they could use it as a way of like just kind of dealing a lot of damage if the terrain is set up, or as a way to get like free switch initiative to block a Rapid Spin or a Defog or something like that on a more offensive team if you have it in a lead position. So there definitely are some interesting applications of this move. And so some Pokemon definitely can make use of it as like a last-ditch effort. Like say, Primarina is about to go down, you blow up, and deal a little bit more damage than Moonblast or something. Just something to think about. But I'll talk a little bit more about Primarina later because it gets another move that's really good. Grassy Glide is probably one of the most interesting moves here because it is a Grass-type move that has priority on grassy terrain. So of course, my first thought was, does Rillaboom learn it? And yes, it does. So now Rillaboom has access to a priority grass move at all times, which is insane for like a choice band set specifically. So that's really freaking good. But obviously other Pokemon can make use of it as well, that are going to be able to benefit from the terrain as well. So if you're using Rillaboom in general, other Pokemon could still run it. It's just most useful on Rillaboom. So I could even see like Flapple using it because of Gluttony, or sorry, because of Hustle, having a priority grass move. That's pretty amazing with Hustle and everything that Flappy has going for it. Again, all of these other Pokemon get it too. Gurgeist could run it with Shadow Sneak, so you have like double priority with both grass and ghost. That's kind of cool. So you can see some interesting applications of it, but again, Rillaboom is going to be the main benefiter of it, as well as also the main Pokemon that's going to be setting it up for the other Pokemon on your team to benefit from it. Rising Voltas is also another terrain-based move. It actually doubles in damage while the opponent is on Psychic Terrain. So this actually doesn't double in damage against flying types and things that levitate. Thankfully for flying types, it's still super effective for the most part. But this is actually obviously going to be most useful for a Pokemon like Pincurchin, which sets it up on its own, which allows this Pokemon actually to work really, really well, because this thing can already like use Memento, it can set up spikes, it can recover, so like it has a lot going for it now for sure. In addition to setting up the electric terrain, which can be benefited from, or which a lot of your Pokemon can benefit from, using stuff like Unburden and the electric seed and stuff like that. So it makes it a little bit more useful for sure with Pincurchin, and all these other Pokemon obviously will benefit from that too, as having a really, really powerful, I believe it becomes 140 base power, which is insane. So yeah, you could even just run like an electric terrain team and just have ridiculous amounts of electric damage, because even Lantern learns it, which is crazy, and so does Rotom. So you could use it on Rotom Wash to get rid of all the ground types that would obviously be resisting or immune to your electric moves. So that's really, really cool for those Pokemon in particular. So it's got some really, really interesting applications for sure. And then we move over to Terrain Pulse, which is basically Terrain Weather Ball, because it increases in power and then turns into the type of the terrain, is what I'm assuming by this description. So I'm assuming it's going to be a 100 base power move, which actually really is just really good for any of these Pokemon that have it. It's a special attack, so as long as you're using a terrain, you can make use of this move. A really cool thing about Stunfisk is also that because of Mimicry, it's going to get Stab on this move if you're using it with terrain, which is kind of a cool little thing, because it'll turn into the type of the terrain and then be able to use the move. So that's kind of a cool little unique thing for this Pokemon in particular, but really just every other Pokemon that wants like an additional coverage move, if you're using this Pokemon on a team that has terrain of some kind, could be an interesting thing to consider, just like I've been using Weather Ball a lot on Jolteon when I'm using it alongside Abomasnow, because it's there. Next one is probably the least useful of the main attacks, which is Skittersmack. It's really hard to justify this move compared to some others, especially because it's not even 100% accurate, but it lowers the target's special attack, and it's a 70 base power bug move. So it could be interesting, but the thing about it is that most Pokemon that learn it would rather run Leech Life or are already running like U-Turn. So unless you desperately need the bug type coverage and the Pokemon didn't already have a bug type move, I can't really see it being like super useful. Maybe Gastrodon could run it because it's 4 times weak to grass moves, but I honestly see a lot less application for this move because, again, X-Scissor has greater base power. Maybe with Crustle, because you can Shell Smash and then use this move to make yourself survive a little bit longer against an opposing special attacker, because you'll damage them and also lower the special attack. But it's not the craziest move in terms of like application, unless I'm completely overlooking something right now. But again, I think most Pokemon either would benefit more so from just running Leech Life or X-Scissor that learn it, that are already running a bug type move. So if it's a couple Pokemon that didn't normally get bug coverage, now get bug coverage, can make use of it, that's pretty cool. But again, off the top of my head, none of these look like anything in particular. The next one's also a really interesting move. So the thing about this move that bugs me is that it's only 5 PP, or 8 PP technically. So what it does is a fire move that deals, it burns the opponent automatically if they've boosted their stats that turn. Now this is really interesting because the thing about this move is if you're using this Pokemon move on using a more defensive Pokemon that learns it, you could definitely benefit more from running this because of the fact that Flamethrower, the increase in power from Flamethrower, is really not that significant, and if it doesn't already run Lava Plume, this has some interesting application. I think it's really interesting that Persian learns it, so it does give it a fire type move because Persian normally didn't have a fire type move, so that's kind of cool with Nasty Plot, but other than that, it's not the most useful move. Again, it's just like another one that's like a utility option. Again, if you're running a more defensive set, I would recommend it over Flamethrower potentially as an alternative. Cursula actually getting it is really cool too because it didn't already have a fire move. So really, oh, and Thievul gets it. I didn't see that earlier. All right. So basically, if your Pokemon didn't already have access to a fire move, this now gives it a fire move, which is pretty cool. So that makes me a little bit more excited about it. But other than that, this move is kind of interesting in terms of regular application. It'll be cool, like, if it actually works, especially if you're like using it against a Pokemon that's setting up its physical attack and then you just automatically burn it. The next move that is on here is Lash Out. This is a 75 base power dark move, but if its stats are lowered during the turn, the power of the move is doubled. So this is interesting because this is kind of like an anti-intimidate dark type move, because dark types get the coolest attacks in the game. Like, let's be honest here, dark types have the coolest move. But anyway, the other useful application of this is if your opponent is going to defog, and it's faster than you. So this is actually kind of a cool little thing. Like, if you have a slow Pokemon and your opponent is going to defog and you know it, this could be kind of a cool way to like deal a significant amount of damage to them, because it turns into a 150 base power move if your stats are lowered. So that's kind of cool, but it's very situational. It's really interesting that Bisharp also learns it, but I don't think anything would like outright defog if Bisharp is already in. But it's kind of just interesting because of that. And obviously, like, you know, you can see there's a ton of Pokemon that learn this. Most of them already learn or have a dark type move that they would be using anyway. Like, if you already learn Knockoff, it's very unlikely that you're going to be running Lash Out. But it's there. It's kind of an interesting little thing. So that's kind of cool if your stats get lowered, but it's situational. And then we got this new move called Poltergeist, which is basically, I think, based on this description, the user attacks the target by controlling the target's item. The move fails if the target doesn't have an item. So my assumption is that it also steals your... it also steals your opponent's item, but if it doesn't, then this is actually really good. But if it does steal your opponent's item, then you can only use it once. But it's 110 base power, and pretty much everything runs an item. So this is kind of unique, especially if you have your own item as well. I actually don't really fully understand how this works, so if somebody who knows more and has looked at this more than I have could tell me, or, you know, in like a few days when this is fully realized, let me know. But that's kind of interesting with that. So it's a more powerful ghost type move, and a lot of ghost types learn it. That's basically all you gotta know about it, and it might take their item, it might not, I don't know, but your opponent has to have an item to use it. Then we get another move called Corrosive Gas. This is essentially knockoff for poison types. Because it doesn't do any damage, but it gets rid of their item. So now finally, Skuntank is, you know, able to knock off an item, which it couldn't do before, even though it's a dark type. So this is really interesting. It doesn't really have a ton of distribution. It's a very short list. I doubt it's going to be that useful, especially because most of these, or a lot of these other Pokemon that would even consider like this move may also already get knockoff anyway. It's kind of interesting though, the Pokemon that learn it, but it's not going to be the most useful thing. It might still be beneficial, I don't know. And then you have this new move called Coaching, which is basically boosting your teammates' attack and defense stat. This is only useful in doubles, so I'm not even going to get into that because I'm sure a bunch of Pokemon learn it. But then we get to probably the most interesting move of them all, which is Flip Turn. So this is basically a water type U-turn that is now introduced in the game. This is really cool actually, because I like the name of it, because it's like swimming and everything. It's kind of fun. But this is probably the biggest game changer for a lot of Pokemon. So that's why I wanted to mainly talk about this, because this opens up a whole can of worms for a lot of these Pokemon. So basically, just think about it this way. Any Pokemon that now can use Flip Turn is now capable of running a more effective offensive set. So Blastoise getting Water Spout could really make use of this. I think I'm not confusing this with the water move that doesn't do anything, am I? I think it's Water Spout. Could run a Scarf set with this now and like be a little bit more mobile. That's kind of cool. Any of these Pokemon really just get a little bit more mobility. Seaking can run a pretty sweet set now if you want to like Choice Scarf it or something. Starmie getting it is really interesting because you could run a variety of things with this in particular. So that's really cool. And another really interesting application for this is Vaporeon, because Vaporeon is a more bulky Pokemon, but Having access to Flip Turn allows it to Wish Pass more effectively, which is really, really interesting. Now, you'd have to get rid of either Heal Bell or Toxic, or even Scald. I don't think you would, though. Or even Protect, maybe. I don't know if you're feeling risky there. One of those moves to do this effectively, so it does limit your move pool a little bit more, but you get a ton of benefits, and this thing has such a massive HP stat that it's really beneficial, so that could be a cool little thing. Kingdra also getting it on Rain is ridiculous, because this thing already hits incredibly hard. Now having the ability to not commit to anything is insane, so that's amazing. Keldeo getting it is insane. Basculin also getting it is really, really good because it already has adaptability. So you're just going to be firing off like insanely powerful water type moves that you don't even have to like have any drawbacks to whatsoever, and that's amazing for this thing. A couple other Pokemon also learning it is interesting too. Primarina getting it is really, really cool. Wishy-Washy getting it is also really cool, even though it does already learn U-turn, but it's pretty cool. And Barraskewda, again, running a banded set in Rain makes this really good. So there's a couple of cool little things. Even Dragalge could use it, I guess. But this is probably the biggest game changer for all of these Pokemon now having access to U-turn who didn't previously. So that's humongous. Then we get a new move also. This is actually a really cool move too. So Triple Axel is a consecutive 3-kick attack that becomes more powerful with each successive hit. Now this sounds very similar to Triple Kick, but the difference is that it doesn't suck like Triple Kick does. So the reason why it doesn't suck is because it's a 20 base power first attack, the second attack is 40 base power, and then the third attack is 60 base power. So total, this is a 120 base power ice type move. Now each attack has a separate accuracy check, so that's a little bit something to keep in mind. So just, you know, you're not going to be as consistent with it, but even if you only get 2 hits of it, it's 60 base power at that point, so that's pretty cool. But this is actually really cool because actually Cinccino learns this, and what I learned from at least looking this up on Bulbapedia is that apparently there's only one accuracy check with Cinccino because of skill link. So it now has a really powerful ice move essentially, which it didn't have. So this is really, really unique because it actually is viable. It's actually a good move as opposed to Triple Kick. Gallade can definitely use it. Weavile obviously definitely going to benefit from it. If it wants to run that over Icicle Crest, again, that's the trade-off. Do you want a more powerful move that might miss, or do you want a move that is also possibly able to miss but could flinch? So it's kind of an interesting thing. Hitmontop also being able to use it with Technician is really cool. So that's interesting. Delibird also getting it is kind of fun because Delibird doesn't really have a great move pool to begin with. So it definitely has some really cool application because it's a very powerful ice move, but just keep in mind the accuracy. Then we get to this new move called Dual Wingbeat. This is actually a so it's basically flying type dual chop. Okay. So it hits twice in a row and it's 40 base power. And when I saw this, my initial, again, thought was, does Scyther get it? And yes, it does. So Scyther, with Technician, now has a 120 base power flying type move, which it can use at its disposal, in addition to also now having heavy duty boots to not be crippled every single time it switches into Stealth Rock. So this is humongous for Scyther, like bar none, this is the biggest benefit to Scyther than any other Pokemon, and that's humongous. A couple other Pokemon also get this, which is interesting, like obviously Scizor gets it too, which it could use as a flying type coverage if it wanted to have it. But other Pokemon, most notably, is Ninjask, because Ninjask now doesn't have to rely on the really sucky Aerial Ace as its only flying type physical attack. So this is significantly better, and that's amazing. And you can see here all the other Pokemon that get it. So it's a pretty cool thing. I think on Fez, I don't know if doesn't Fezzik get Brave Bird? I know it didn't previously. It might get it now. I don't remember. And then all these other Pokemon now have an alternative option to Brave Bird that's a little bit stronger instead of like Aerial Ace. It's nice that they finally released, you know, a flying type move that isn't 60 base power. So that's kind of cool. Because Pluck, Wing Attack, and Aerial Ace are all the same base power, interestingly enough. But you can see all the Pokemon that get it here. So it's interesting. It's not the coolest new move, but it's there. It gives you some different coverage options. So that's kind of neat. And then lastly, we got Scorching Sands, and there's 2 Pokemon that would benefit from this the most. Basically, it is a ground type move, I almost said sand type move, that can also burn the target. Now, I don't know what the percentage is. I want to assume it's 30, but who the heck knows. But either way, regardless of that, it's really interesting because now ground types that get this move can burn opponents with their ground moves. Now, I was looking to see if Camerupt got it, but Camerupt isn't in the game yet, but that would be cool because then it could have Lava Plume and this move to just really just spread burn incredibly easily against opponents. But again, it's a special attack, so there's not a ton of specially offensive ground types or Pokemon that can use this, but it does give some other Pokemon a ground type coverage move that they may not have previously had, like Arcanine, which is really interesting. And also Ninetales, I don't think, got a ground move either. So that's kind of cool. That can also burn. Really interesting. But the biggest benefit of this, there's actually 2 Pokemon, and one of them is like, you're going to be like, why are you even telling me this? But one of them is Onyx, actually. Because Onyx is just like, in Little Cup, really, really good. But also, it really can only do one thing. It sets up Stealth Rock fast. That's what Onyx does. So if you're using this in PU, you can at least set up Stealth Rock fast and then also have a way to burn opponents, because that's kind of neat, because like, its offensive stats are absolute garbage. So you'd run this with like Body Press and Scorching Sands, and that would be like plus Stealth Rock and Taunt or something, and that would be Onyx. So that would be the first Pokemon, but the main Pokemon again is going to be Claydol. Because Claydol now on a more defensive set can run a special ground type move because it's not really dealing any significant damage, but also potentially burn opponents, and that's humongous for Claydol, especially with everything it also has going for it, with Rapid Spin and being able to set up hazards. So Claydol is really, really interesting now because of this. I think that's going to be a humongous benefit for it. You could even run this on a Calm Mind set, which is even better, because then you're obviously boosting your special defense, and then you're also potentially crippling physical attackers if you get the burn. I could see some other Pokemon running this, like any of these Pokemon that learn it could make use of it as kind of like a niche option. Oh, sorry, I forgot about Palisand as well. Palisand getting it is really big too, because Palisand doesn't get Will-O-Wisp, or at least didn't. I haven't checked its move pool this gen yet. Cinderace also getting it. Hey, now I can use it with Libero. That's kind of cool. But yeah, so it definitely has some interesting applications for some Pokemon more so than others. It's not quite as game-changing as Scald was when it came out, but this move definitely has some applications, so I'd consider it on a few different Pokemon for sure. So those are all the new Move Tutor moves. I hope you guys enjoyed listening to me talk about them. There's kind of a lot going on here, and I'm interested to see now how things change with all the new Pokemon that are now out, plus the additions of these new moves to their move pools. Who knows, there might be some Pokemon that you never thought you'd see become OU and things like that, or some Pokemon really shine because of some of this stuff, like some of the ones I've talked about already. But anyways, everybody, that is it for this video. So as always, take care, goodbye, and I will see you all next time.